Last time we met, we took a look at what were, in my opinion, the top 10 worst bosses in the Dark Souls Trilogy. We looked at some pretty terrible bosses, but today, we jump to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. In today's video, we're gonna look at the best enemies that From Software has ever designed, and here they are, the top 10 best bosses in Dark Souls. Just a quick heads up, this is going to be the only Dark Souls 2 boss on the entire list. I would go into why Sir Alan and Fume Knight, who are very obvious picks for this list, aren't on this list, but considering that people are already pissed off at me for daring to say that I disliked Yorm...
Yeah, I'm not pulling the pin on that grenade.
Being the final boss of the final Dark Souls 2 DLC, the Burnt Ivory King is an absolutely incredible battle that not only is cinematic, with you jumping into the old chaos with your fellow Knights of Alayam Lois, but plays absolutely beautifully. Upon hopping into the old chaos, you are immediately surrounded by charred Knights of Alayam Lois. Once you fight them off long enough, your fellow Knights will gradually sacrifice themselves to shut down the portals that are spawning in the charred Knights. Once you kill enough of the Knights and all 3 of the portals are closed off, one final portal opens, revealing the Burnt Ivory King himself. And dear God, this man is not a pushover. He is incredibly fast, hits like a freight train going over the speed limit, and can even buff his sword to turn it into a lightsaber. A freaking lightsaber! This dude is basically the Dark Souls equivalent of Darth Vader. The Burnt Ivory King is no slouch, and barely gives you any time to breathe. You're forced to constantly dodge his attacks while looking for any openings you can to chip away at his health, all while he tries to sucker you in so he can cut you down. The music is what really sells the fight for me. It's an absolutely beautiful orchestral piece that really sells how dire the situation is. Between the old chaos, the charred Knights, and the Ivory King himself, the music fits the setting perfectly and brings the whole fight together. The lore of this boss is pretty amazing too. The Ivory King was once the ruler of the lost kingdom of Alayam Lois, but upon discovering the old chaos beneath Alayam Lois, the king decided to build his castle on top of the chaos and even decided to put his throne right in front of the hole that leads to it, meaning that should the old chaos start to get out of hand, the Ivory King and his men could act as the kingdom's first line of defense. When the old chaos did start to ignite, the king departed with his faithful knights, entered the old chaos, but unfortunately immediately became consumed by it. This guy was such a badass. Not just that, he's one of the only bosses in the franchise that genuinely makes me feel bad for killing him. All he ever wanted was the safety of his people and took every opportunity he could to ensure it, which resulted in him becoming engulfed by the old chaos. It really makes you feel bad for the guy. My only real issue with this fight is that you have to find all the Alayam Lois Knights before the fight. Otherwise, you'll have to fight an infinite number of charred Knights on top of the Ivory King himself. Other than that, the Burnt Ivory King is a damn near perfect boss, both in terms of gameplay and narrative, and was the perfect way to cap off Dark Souls 2, especially in order to make up for the utter garbage that was Nassandra. Gwyn is probably the most famous boss fight in all of Dark Souls. Despite this, the final boss of Dark Souls 1 has gotten a bad rep over the last few years. Many players note that his attacks are fairly predictable, his health isn't that high, and he's easy to parry. Yeah, that's right, Gwyn is the only boss in Dark Souls 1 that can not only be parried, but even freaking riposted. But from what many people have said about this fight, it seems as though Gwyn is a complete pushover. This could not be any further from the truth. I mean, yeah, Gwyn's attacks can be predictable, but he's incredibly aggressive, constantly running after the player and even jumping through the air to get to you if you manage to outpace him. And as for parrying him, I mean, yeah, for many it's easy to do so, but for me, it's really hard to do so. If you're someone who has beaten Dark Souls 1 hundreds of times, parrying Gwyn is probably a piece of cake to you by now. Hell, it's probably a part of your muscle memory. But for me, a Dark Souls newbie who has only beaten this game a handful of times, my parrying skills are less than desirable. Because of this, I end up fighting Gwyn one-on-one, and it's a thrilling battle. As soon as you walk into the kiln, you see Gwyn just standing there, flaming sword in hand, as if he's frozen in time, waiting for someone to enter the ring. And then the moment you step in there, he jumps through the air like a majestic seagull, and the fight is on. The thing that makes me love this fight the most is the lore behind it. As we all know, Gwyn was the very first person to give up his life to keep the first flame burning. However, Gwyn didn't die in this process. Instead, he became hollow, and now simply wanders around the kiln in the first flame, waiting to kill anyone who may extinguish the flame he sacrificed so much to keep alive. Gwyn gave up his life for the flame, and now his life quite literally is the flame. He's become so hollow and so decrepit that he can't even fight properly. When he runs, he looks hunched over. When he swings his sword, he struggles to hold onto it. When he goes to grab you, he almost trips over himself. All of this, mixed with the fact that he can be parried, makes me believe that this version of Gwyn is far from his strongest form. Hell, this is even backed up in the name of the boss. Gwyn was the Lord of Sunlight, but in the boss fight, he's known exclusively as the Lord of Cinder. Of Cinder! This man has fallen so far from grace, he's now recognized as the Lord of the weakest source of flame known to man. All of this, combined with the gorgeous arena and the music that accompanies it, known to many as Pling Pling Plong, makes Gwyn not the best boss from a gameplay standpoint, but arguably the best boss in Dark Souls 1 from a narrative standpoint. For many, Lothric Lorian is the hardest boss in Dark Souls 3. For me personally, I don't struggle against them that much. Most times I can beat them on my first attempt, but does that make them any less entertaining?
Oh, hell no!
Lothric Lorian are the best of the four Lords of Cinder in terms of boss design. Where the Abyss Watchers were an alright early game attitude adjustment, the Twin Princes are a fantastic late game smack to the cranium that tests your reflexes and your target management skills. If you get complacent or lose focus for even a second against these two will be sending your ass back to the nearest bonfire as soon as possible. As soon as the fight starts, Prince Lothric sends his older brother, Lorian, after you. And Lorian ain't no pushover. Lorian is incredibly aggressive, being able to lunge himself at the player, and has incredible forward momentum, despite the fact that he can't even use his legs. He's also incredibly cumbersome to get hits on too, mainly due to the fact that he has lots of attacks that allow him to hurt you from pretty much anywhere in the arena. Boy has got some range and attacks for days. And just when you think you're about to finally overcome Lorian's attack patterns, the game decides to rip you a new one when he starts to inexplicably teleport. Turns out, Prince Lothric can give his brother Lorian a little assistance by granting him instant transmission. Once you finally slay Lorian, Lothric decides to get his ass off his throne for 1 minute and puts himself in harm's way, jumping onto his brother's back and performing a resurrection that even Gael from Street Fighter 3 would be proud of. Now you have to deal with both Lothric and Lorian at the same time, both of which have their individual health bars. This is where the true battle begins, as Lorian now attacks even faster, teleports more often, and even has Lothric buff his sword, making his damage even more ludicrous. Not just that, but now that Lothric is clinging onto his brother's back like a parasite, he can assist more directly, throwing soul spears and soul masses at the player to keep them from ever thinking about coming near Lorian for an attack. He'll even throw out spells after some of Lorian's longer attacks, forcing you to relearn the timings and to be more patient. Plus, since Lothric is on Lorian's back, you have to get behind the two to actually deal damage to them, which is easier said than done. Oh, and if you think killing Lorian again will allow you to focus on just Lothric for the remainder of the battle, you're wrong! As soon as Lorian goes down, Lothric just resurrects him again. The only way to definitively win this fight is to kill Lothric, which will finally put the two of them down for good. After enduring the hell that is the trek to the top of Lothric Castle, the Twin Princes are an amazing boss fight in terms of gameplay and act as a perfect penultimate boss to the true final boss of Dark Souls 3's main game. Ah, yes. The classic. Ornstein Smough were one of the first duo bosses in Dark Souls history, and to this day, they remain one of the best. The thing that makes them so legendary among many in the Dark Souls community is what they represent. What the Dragon Slayer and the Executioner represent is a literal brick wall. They are the only thing keeping most players from progressing into the second half of Dark Souls 1, and they don't plan on letting you win without a fight. If you've ever had a friend stop playing Dark Souls 1 before they finish the game, these two are the most likely culprit. The thing that makes these two so well balanced, as well as so f***ing dangerous, is the fact that they act as polar opposites of each other. Ornstein is incredibly fast, capable of zipping around the arena like a chicken with its head chopped off, but doesn't hit all that hard. But with how fast and how often he can hit you, it quickly starts to add up. Smough, on the other hand, is incredibly slow, incredibly clumsy, and always lagging behind like a pensioner who lost his keys. But if he does hit you, you'll get bashed in the skull with the force of a brick being launched out of a cannon. Unlike other duo fights that From Software would later go on to make, Godskin Duo, they don't get in the way of each other. They're spaced out just enough so that dealing with them is actually manageable. They're a tough duo to bring down as well, but with enough work, you can eventually take one of them down. And this is where the fight enters legendary status. Once you kill Ornstein or Smough, the one that is still alive will absorb the energy of the other and fight you one-on-one. You'd think that this would make the fight easier. Welp, it's quite the opposite. Not only do they absorb the remaining energy of their partner in crime, they also regain all their health and even gain supercharged versions of the moves their partner could do. Mix that in with how long a single go of this fight can take, and you have a fight that will go down in the history books as one of the highlights of Dark Souls 1, and the perfect way to cap off Anor Londo. There, I said Anor Londo correctly this time. I didn't say Anor Lando like a fucking idiot would. You happy now? Yep, your eyes are not deceiving you. I think the Demon Prince is the best duos boss in the Souls Trilogy.
What?
Putting the Demon Prince above ONS is probably raising a lot of eyebrows right now, but considering the reception to my last Dark Souls video, I'm used to it by now. Besides, it's not like it was easy deciding if ONS or the Demon Prince got this spot. It was a hard choice, but in the end, I had to go with the Demon Prince. The Demon Prince is the one thing keeping the player from reaching the Ringed City in the aptly named Ringed City DLC. Once you plunge yourself into literal oblivion, you land in a destroyed and desolate version of Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1. Then the demons wake up and the battle gets underway. The demon from below and the demon in pain will both try and target you at once, but do so in a manner that reminds me of ONS. One of the demons will try and attack you head-on, scratching and clawing at you, while the other will stand in the back and try to damage you with poison, mist, and other ranged attacks. Occasionally, the demon duo will even swap attacks, and now you have to try and figure out which demon is performing what attacks. This makes the fight feel much more involved, as you have to keep tabs on what demon is doing what attack and where they are in the arena. Losing sight of either of the demons can result in getting your booty cheeks clapped within seconds, as the damage these guys are capable of dishing out is ridiculous. Once you kill both demons, you'll most likely think that the fight is over. But newsflash, this is Dark Souls, and From Software does not care about your feelings. The last demon you killed comes back to life and reignites itself like that phoenix from Harry Potter. In the process, he sheds his skin and becomes the Demon Prince. And now, you've got an even bigger target to deal with. Not only does the Demon Prince have way more health than either of the previous demons, but also flies all over the f***ing place. He lunges at the player, claws at your flesh, and throws what may as well be the literal sun at you. This boss transcends being a regular Dark Souls boss, and starts feeling like something out of a game like God of War, what with the spectacle, the violence, and how cinematic it can get. You can definitely argue that gameplay-wise, ONS is better, but in terms of all-around spectacle, I have to give it to the Demon Prince himself. Knight Artorias is one of those bosses that puts the literal fear of God into your soul when you start thinking about him. As the second boss you encounter in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, Artorias is one of the most exciting fights in the entire franchise. After being hyped up constantly in Dark Souls 1's base game, finally being able to fight Artorias is an amazing feeling. From a gameplay standpoint, Artorias is one of the fairest fights in the franchise. He hits like the second shot of the vaccine, can fly through the air while wielding an ultra greatsword, and can buff his damage exponentially. But to counteract all this, his timings are pretty easy once you figure him out. His flying attacks can be easily telegraphed, and unlike another boss I've talked about, Smelter Demon, you can actually interrupt his buff by poise breaking him. Artorias is one of the closest examples of a fight in Dark Souls where the fight feels like a true one-on-one bout. It's a take and receive kind of fight. If you hit Artorias, the man's just gonna give you a receipt for even daring to lay a finger on him. But don't let what I've just said make you think he ain't hard. Oh boy, he is. This man is going to f***ing send your ass back to the bonfire stat. Not only is Artorias' gameplay amazing, but Artorias' lore is truly something else. Remember how I mentioned that Artorias is one of those bosses that is terrifying when you think about it? Well, this is why. Artorias was a warrior that served under Lord Gwyn, and was sent to combat Manus' father the Abyss. Unfortunately, he failed his mission, losing to Manus and in the process breaking his arm and losing his great shield. Not just that, but he is slowly losing his mind to the Abyss. It's a tragic tale, one that makes his inevitable death in Dark Souls 1's main game all the more tragic. Then you realize something. This man is using an ultra greatsword with one arm, his other arm is broken, his mind is in shambles, and he's missing his shield. This man is on his last legs, quite possibly about to die in a few hours anyway, but yet he's still out here kicking your shit in and looking good while doing it.
Are you real?
Yes. Yes, I am. Can you imagine what this man could do if he was at full strength? He'd launch your fucking ass into orbit. That's what he'd do. Artorias is the perfect example of a boss that is fun to play, amazing to watch, and a fight that more than lived up to its legendary expectations. So, anyone up for a round of hot takes? Putting champion Gundyr above Artorias is probably something that a majority of people were not expecting. In fact, I'm pretty sure that saying this out loud has already resulted in a few people tracking my IP address and traveling to my house to chuck a brick at me. Well, you got close, but you missed me by about 5 feet. Try again once you find another brick. Champion Gundyr is what would happen if you took Udex Gundyr and pumped him full of every illegal substance known to man. Unlike Udex, Champion Gundyr doesn't f*** around, and will quite literally boot your ass back to the nearest bonfire. Champion Gundyr is way more aggressive than Udex, throwing out long winding attacks with various timings and strings. The thing that makes Champion Gundyr so dangerous is that no matter where he is, or what direction he's facing, he'll find a way to hit you. You dodged him, he shoulder barges you. You get behind him, he boots you in the face without needing to look. You try to keep your distance from him, he runs towards you with murderous intent and slashes your ass in two. Gundyr never slows down for a second, and is constantly on the attack. As the fight goes on, he only gets more and more aggressive. It's as if hitting Gundyr flips his anger switch from mad to
absolutely livid.
He constantly keeps the player on their toes, and forces them to decide when the best moment is to slip in a hit. Not just that, but Gundyr's lore is pretty interesting to boot. When you fight him at the start of the game, when he's still Udex Gundyr, we discovered that he was bested by a warrior in the past, back when he was Champion Gundyr. Shortly thereafter, he became a sheath to the coiled sword to test future champions as Udex Gundyr, Judge of Ash. When you enter the Untended Graves, you're stepping back into the past, into a world without fire. When you finally have your rematch with Gundyr, you realize that this is him at his prime, back when he was champion. It's then revealed that you were the one who beat Gundyr in the past, and the reason why he became Udex Gundyr. Champion Gundyr is basically what would happen if you fought Artorias at full strength. What makes the fight cooler is that, unlike Artorias, you get to fight him at his strongest possible form. You get to see him evolve from a wilted husk into an absolute badass. Besides, he was called a champion for a reason. When you're the firstborn son of Lord Gwyn, you have a lifetime of expectation to live up to. and in my opinion, Nameless King surpasses all of those expectations and then some. Acting as the closing chapter of Archdragon Peak, one of the best areas in Dark Souls 3, Nameless King instills the player with a feeling of pure adrenaline that not many other bosses in the Souls series can provide. Nameless is a completely optional boss, so when you come across him for the first time, you're probably thinking that he can't be that hard. Then you fight him and realize why he's optional. If this guy had to be defeated to progress in the game, I guarantee you that about 95% of people who bought this game would never see the end credits. This guy could have locked out more people out of beating this game than ONS did in Dark Souls 1. The arena you fight in sets the tone immediately. You're literally fighting on top of the clouds, with the rest of the peak being mostly shrouded in, you guessed it, more clouds. And as soon as you walk past the boss door, Nameless flies in on a fucking storm drake and greets you with the typical Gwyn family welcome. That being an ass-kicking unlike any you've ever felt before, and will ever feel again. Phase 1 of the fight sees you try to knock Nameless off his storm drake, which is easier said than done when you consider that the drake never stops flying around the damn place. Not only does the drake try to take a chunk out of you, but Nameless does as well, using a giant lightning halberd to do so. And once you finally knock Nameless off the drake, Nameless flips his switch and prepares to murder you in cold blood.
And here we go.
Once it's between you and Nameless, you realize that not only is this guy the literal king of laying the smackdown, you realize that this dude probably could have given his dad a run for his own money, and then some. Nameless hits you like a bag of sledgehammers, all while you're practically chipping away at his health. Nameless is constantly moving around the arena, launching bolts of lightning at you and gusts of wind, all while staying on the move and occasionally throwing himself at you like an Olympic javelin. Unlike his dad, Nameless isn't easy to cut down, even if you know what to expect. Just when you think you figured him out, he starts ramping up the speed, and eventually, you'll find yourself rolling all over the place just trying to dodge one or two of his attacks. And what makes all of this even worse is that if you die, you have to kill the Storm Drake all over again just for another shot at putting this guy down. The amount of effort From Software put into an optional boss in a missable area of the game is absolutely extraordinary, and shows that when Miyazaki and his team put on their thinking caps, they can muster up something that invokes fear in the names of many just by saying its name. And reminder, he's the Nameless King. As the final boss of Dark Souls 3's base game, Soul of Cinder caps off the base game in a glorious manner. Many refer to the Soul of Cinder as overrated, relying too heavily on fan service, but to me, he's the perfect encapsulation of the Dark Souls series as a whole. The lore behind the Soul of Cinder might be my favorite bit of lore when it comes to any character or thing in this universe. The Soul of Cinder is the literal embodiment of everyone and everything that has linked the First Flame, which means that your character from Dark Souls 1, if you decided to link the flame, is inside the Soul of Cinder. The idea of the Soul of Cinder being the physical manifestation of everyone who has ever rekindled the First Flame coming back to form this absolutely horrifying knight and protect it in one final battle is so fucking cool. Just the concept alone is enough to give me chills. When the fight starts, you realize that it actually shares a few elements with Gwyn from the original Dark Souls. The fact that the arena is referred to as the Kiln of the First Flame, the fact that the arena is mostly empty like the original Kiln, the fact that the boss is waiting there for you to arrive, and the sudden burst of energy it receives once it finally acknowledges your presence. Once the Soul of Cinder starts charging at you, he'll attack you with a basic straight sword, but you'll soon come to realize that the Soul of Cinder has many tricks up its sleeves. This boss has the ability to completely swap its moveset mid-fight. This guy can swap his straight sword out for a curved sword, a lance, a talisman combo, and even a catalyst. Yeah, Cinder doesn't just use standard weaponry. This thing is capable of using magic and miracles as well. Not just that, but he also has access to pyromancy, which includes big-ass fireballs, poison mist, and even power within from the original Dark Souls. Since the Soul of Cinder is capable of switching between these forms at any time, you really gotta stay on your toes. If you get too greedy against the Soul of Cinder or allow it to use some of its more powerful attacks, death is pretty much guaranteed. What really sells this fight for me is the music and the arena. As you're fighting the Soul of Cinder, you'll be doing so in a new, reimagined version of the Kiln of the First Flame. But instead of it being this dark, old, dingy coliseum, it's now a field filled with flowers, which might remind some people of the arena from Sekiro, which shares a similar aesthetic. Also might have something to do with the fact that both these games were made by the same company, but that is completely off topic. Not only that, but you're now surrounded by a moon that has been fully corrupted by the fading of the flame, and now even resembles the dark sign. The fading of the flame has started to envelop everything, including things that are millions of miles away within the deep reaches of space. The fate of the world hangs in the balance, and all you have to do is put the Soul of Cinder down for good. And when you do,
I'm back, bitches!
The music completely shifts. The Soul of Cinder bursts back to life and rekindles its sword, and then you hear those same free notes from Dark Souls 1. Gwyn has re-emerged from deep within the Soul of Cinder to defend the flame he sacrificed so much to rekindle one last time. Using a damn near identical moveset alongside some new lightning attacks, Gwyn gives it his all to ensure the fire does not die out. But in the end, it isn't enough. You swing your sword one last time, and the Soul of Cinder goes down for good, in what can only be described as a battle of both mental and emotional fortitude. After 3 adventures spanning 5 years, you finally complete the Dark Souls Trilogy in the most fitting way imaginable. Or do you? Listen, I'm fully aware that Gael is the most cliché pick for the best boss in Dark Souls, but there is a reason why so many people see it as such. Gael not only acts as the ending boss for the Ringed City DLC, but acts as the ending boss for Dark Souls as a whole. Every boss we've ever fought, both good and bad, have led us to this moment. You fight Gael in the now collapsed Ringed City, where there is nothing left except the barely visible sun, mountains of sand, Slave Knight Gael, and you, the player. There is nothing left in this world. Everyone and everything has died. And now, it's time to decide who will be the ruler of nothing. Who will rule over the wasteland as the bearer of the Dark Soul? As soon as the fight begins, Gael runs forth on all fours and swings wildly. His attacks have no hint of strategy, and shows just how broken Gael's mind is from murdering the pygmies in order to acquire the blood of the Dark Soul. He leaps through the air and tries to swing his longsword, which has now become rusted, and you have to try and avoid the onslaught long enough to actually get in a hit. Once Gael reaches 2/3 of his health, he finally unleashes the power of the Dark Soul. Imbuing his sword with its power, he marches forth, filled with determination from his new power, and not only does Gael manage to compose himself, he also throws out everything he possibly can. He pulls out a repeating crossbow, uses the Way of White Corona from the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, and even summons Pillars of Lightning to chase you down. All while this is going on, Gael is constantly throwing himself at you, flinging himself through the air and slamming his sword downwards with malice. Once you get him to his last third, however, is where the fun truly begins. Gael reverts to his feral instincts and starts going berserk, throwing his near-lifeless body around the arena like a ragdoll, desperately trying to inflict any amount of damage he can to you. The music reaches its peak, the lightning strikes brighter and louder, and the full power of the Dark Soul is unleashed. After 3 games, all of which have the name of the item Gael is currently using, we finally get to see its power, and it is nothing short of terrifying. This entire fight is just a massive roller coaster that keeps building and building until eventually it peaks at the end, and you feel a tingle go down your spine as you realize what's going on. 2 warriors are duking it out at the end of time, with no spectators to tell stories of the legendary escapade. The only one who can live to tell the tale is you. And once Gael is dead, you begin to ask yourself, how did it come to this? And that's when Dark Souls as a franchise finally hits you with that cerebral gut punch. All the characters you grew to love, all the locations you enjoyed exploring, they don't exist anymore. The world, like an actual flame, has fizzled out. And now that Gael is dead, there's nothing left to live for. No cities, no kingdoms, nothing. The world was doomed from the moment the first flame was lit. And now, as you stand in the desolate wasteland, you realize that this is all that's left. This is the end of Dark Souls, and it all ends with you, the player.